Wyatt Cole turned 17 in the waiting room of the Department of Children and Family Services in Rutland, Vermont. The social worker brought him a cupcake from the break room refrigerator, the kind with garish pink frosting that no one had claimed, and explained that the family he'd been living with for 2 years had decided to move to Connecticut without him. They felt he was pulling them down, the social worker said carefully, as though this was a kind thing to say. Wyatt understood. He'd heard it before. He was a liability, a legal responsibility, someone else's obligation. Within a month, the state found him a youth shelter in Woodstock, a beautiful town in central Vermont where the fall foliage would have been stunning if Wyatt had been the kind of person who noticed beauty. He wasn't. He noticed survival. He noticed which staff members were trustworthy and which ones pocketed donations. He noticed which kids would steal your socks and which would share theirs. He noticed how to make himself small, invisible, forgettable. Then a letter arrived, addressed to him, care of the shelter. An attorney from a firm in Montpellier writing about a property that had been left to him in a will. His great-grandmother, Wyatt Cole, had died 3 weeks prior. A woman he'd met exactly once, at a funeral when he was 4 years old, and didn't understand why everyone was crying. Margaret had left him a property in the Green Mountains above Woodstock, 20 acres of land that had housed what was once a thriving agricultural research station. Now it was abandoned. The greenhouse structure was falling apart, the ground cracked where nature was reclaiming what humans had built. The attorney explained this with apologetic language. The property has minimal resale value. The structures are deteriorating. We recommend you contact a developer about selling the land. Wyatt was 17 with nothing but what fit in a single backpack. A property, even a worthless one, was more than he'd ever owned. He walked. The shelter was closed on Sundays, and staff was minimum. Wyatt left in the morning with his backpack, following a hand-drawn map the attorney had sent. He followed Route 4 out of Woodstock, taking a hiking trail that climbed toward higher elevation, the autumn air cool and sharp, the forest around him transforming into something wild and untamed. The trail was overgrown in places, clearly unused for years. He climbed for 3 hours, his lungs burning, his legs working hard, and emerged into a clearing where the world seemed to stop. The greenhouse structure rose from the earth like something from another century. Glass panels, many of them cracked, several shattered entirely, covered a skeletal frame of old metal and wood. The building had once been imposing and grand, a symbol of knowledge and cultivation. Now it was a shell. Glass panels hanging loose like broken teeth, vines growing wild through the structure, nature reclaiming what had been taken from it. The ground was cracked in places where frost had broken the earth, soft and spongy in others where moss had grown thick. Behind the greenhouse stood a small cottage, its paint peeling, a stone chimney leaning precariously. Wyatt stood in the clearing and felt something he couldn't name. This was his. The deed was in his backpack. No one could take this away from him because it was already abandoned, already considered worthless. Even loss couldn't touch him here. The cottage had a locked door, but the lock was old and corroded. Wyatt forced it open. Really, it was barely a force, just a push at the right angle, and found himself in a space frozen in time. A kitchen with dishes in the sink, green with mold. A small bedroom with blankets still on the mattress. A larger room with shelves of books, notebooks, journals, all covered in dust and spider silk. And a writing desk with papers organized in careful stacks. He slept in the cottage that night, on the mattress despite its smell, too tired to care. In the morning, he began to explore. The greenhouse foundation was solid, though the glass was ruined. Behind the main greenhouse structure, he found something that made him stop. A depression in the ground where snow hadn't fallen evenly, suggesting heat rising from below. A hatch of concrete and metal, overgrown with ivy, with a handle that was heavy and cold. He pulled. It resisted for a moment, then opened with a groan of rust and hinges. Below was darkness, and a smell like earth and minerals and something else. A cool, preserved smell. He found a kerosene lamp in the cottage, lit it, and descended stone steps that had been deliberately carved into the earth. The underground space was vast. The moment Wyatt's feet touched the floor of the chamber, he understood that this was not a basement. This was something intentional, something planned, something built with purpose and kept with obsessive care. The chamber walls were lined with shelving built into the stone itself, row after row of sealed glass containers. Some held what looked like dried seeds, thousands of varieties, each labeled with careful handwriting. Others held seedlings preserved in liquid, suspended in time. There were specialized equipment stations with labels written in precise scientific notation, germination chambers, growth analysis stations, temperature and humidity monitoring systems. There was a desk, a real desk, not improvised, with notebooks stacked in chronological order, the spines labeled with years spanning decades. On the desk sat a leather-bound journal, and when Wyatt opened it, he found the first entry dated 43 years prior. Today, I begin the work that no one else will fund. Seeds from endangered plants. Specimens from species the world has marked for extinction. I'm creating a preservation system, a cryogenic archive below the greenhouse. If we're to have any hope of restoring what we've destroyed, we need to save the genetic heritage of the plants we're losing. This cannot be done publicly. The university blocked the project. The funding committee said there was no profit potential. So I built it alone, in the greenhouse my family built 70 years ago, preserved by the one person who understood what I was trying to do. Wyatt sat on a bench that had been carved deliberately from the stone and read. The entries went on for decades. His great-grandmother had been a plant geneticist, a researcher, someone who understood that species extinction was not a problem that would solve itself. She'd spent 40 years collecting seeds of endangered species, thousands of varieties of plants that were disappearing from the world, medicinal plants that indigenous cultures had used for thousands of years, crop varieties from heritage strains that could resist drought and disease, ancient orchid species on the verge of extinction. She'd preserved them in cryogenic storage, the seeds in liquid nitrogen, dormant, viable, waiting. There were notebooks filled with her research. The work was meticulous and brilliant. She'd documented every species, its origin, its properties, its genetic markers. She'd written protocols for revival, for cultivation, for restoration. And in the final entries, written in increasingly shaky handwriting, she'd written about the future. I'm 83 years old. My hands shake. I tire easily. I cannot continue this work much longer. But it matters. It matters so desperately. Whoever finds this, if this is my great-grandson Wyatt, if you find your way here, please understand. I didn't choose to leave your mother. The courts took her from me. Bureaucracy and law and systems that don't understand that some things matter more than what you can hold in your hands. I held you once, when you were 4. I held you and I was so afraid I was already losing you. So I built this instead. I preserved what I could save. Maybe these seeds will matter more than anything I could have given you by being present. Maybe seeds matter. I have to believe seeds matter. Wyatt sat in the underground chamber and wept. Not from sadness, but from the sudden understanding that he had been thought about. His great-grandmother had known about him. And when she couldn't have him, she'd built something else. She'd spent 40 years building something that mattered. She'd built it in the ground beneath the crumbling greenhouse, hidden from a world that didn't understand its value. And she'd left it for him. The preservation systems were ingenious. Temperature and humidity were controlled through geothermal circulation, pipes that drew warmth from the Earth's interior. The cryogenic systems had backup generators powered by a hand-crank mechanism that required daily engagement to maintain. The water systems were completely closed-loop. Everything was designed to function indefinitely, to preserve the seeds in perfect stasis, waiting. Wyatt spent a week at the property. He read every notebook. He understood the protocols. He learned which species were most critically endangered, which ones had the highest restoration potential, and he faced a choice. Reveal what was here. Risk it being seized and cataloged and stored in institutional archives where it would become a footnote in scientific literature, or protect it, maintain it, keep it alive. Then Dr. Helena Fortis arrived, and the choice was taken from him. She came in a hybrid vehicle with university logos on the door: University of Vermont, College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone used to having her authority acknowledged. She stood in the clearing looking at the greenhouse and smiled with an expression that made Wyatt's spine tense. "We've been looking for Margaret Cole's research for a very long time," she said. The university knew she was conducting work here, but she was deliberately secretive about it. "We have funding now. We have restoration projects in place across North America. We can use what she created: seeds for restoration, genetic diversity. We can restore damaged ecosystems, rebuild agricultural resilience, create a living vault of genetic material that could ensure food security for millions of people. All we need is access to what's here." She offered him $70,000. Enough to go to college, enough to have a life separate from survival. Wyatt refused. "I need time to think about it," he said. And Dr. Fortis's smile turned sharp. "Of course, but not too long. The university has a legal team that can move very quickly if necessary. There are environmental regulations, site assessments, preservation orders. We could make this very complicated for you, or we could make it very simple. We're trying to help." It was a threat with a smile. Instead of accepting, Wyatt contacted the Vermont Native Plant Society. He called the American Seed Bank Network. He reached out to botanical gardens and heirloom seed organizations. And he brought in Professor James York from the university, a different department, someone with no institutional interest in claiming the research as the college's property. What followed was not legal warfare, but something slower and more powerful: documentation. Professor York came to the property and spent 3 days photographing, cataloging, verifying, recording every seed variety, every species, every protocol that Margaret Cole had developed. Articles started appearing in botanical journals. Conservancy organizations learned about the preservation system. The American Botanical Congress sent representatives to verify the collection's authenticity. Dr. Fortis's offers stopped arriving. The legal threats dissolved. The university's interest evaporated once it became clear that the seeds were going to be a public trust, not a research commodity. Wyatt stayed at the property. He completed the restoration protocols that his great-grandmother had documented. He brought in specialists to maintain the cryogenic systems. He worked with conservation organizations to begin reintroduction projects. Endangered orchid species started being restored to protected habitats in the Northeast. Heritage crop varieties began being distributed to farmers and indigenous groups who could use them. A strain of native wildflower was brought back from the edge of extinction. The greenhouse itself was preserved. The glass panels were replaced one by one. The vines were pruned back. The structure was stabilized. It became a working space again, a place where seeds could be germinated and saplings could be grown before being moved to restoration sites. Wyatt enrolled in online classes, then transferred to a state university while maintaining the property during summers and breaks. He studied plant genetics, ecological restoration, and preservation science. He lived in the cottage where his great-grandmother had lived, in the shadow of the greenhouse she'd built. The world didn't know about the cryogenic seed vault beneath the greenhouse for many years. It was protected not by fame, but by its own essential nature. It mattered so much to so many people, in such concrete and immediate ways, that no corporation could claim it and no bureaucracy could subsume it. It was a living archive of genetic diversity, a vault against extinction, a monument to the belief that some things are worth preserving. Wyatt would sometimes stand in the underground chamber and think about his great-grandmother's last entry. She'd written that she didn't know if it mattered, if seeds mattered. It turned out they did. They mattered to farmers rebuilding agricultural practices in a changing climate. They mattered to conservationists trying to restore damaged ecosystems. They mattered to indigenous communities seeking to reclaim traditional plants and foodways. They mattered to a 17-year-old boy who'd been thrown away by the world and had found his purpose in the ground beneath a crumbling greenhouse. Have you ever dismissed something as worthless, only to discover later that its value was hiding just beneath the surface, waiting for someone to understand?